History tells us that electricity was mastered only in recent centuries. We think of Benjamin Franklin with his kite. We think of Alessandro Volta stocking the first batteries. We think of Edison, Tesla, and the glowing light bulb. But what if the story begins much earlier? What if, hidden in the deserts of Iraq, a clay jar holds a secret that rewrites the timeline of science? This is the Baghdad Battery. At first glance, it looks ordinary, a small pot, rough, unadorned. But inside are pieces that don't belong together. Copper, iron, sealed with asphalt. A design so deliberate that modern scientists instantly recognize the pattern. It resembles a galvanic cell, the foundation of every battery we use today. Which raises a haunting question. Did an ancient civilization harness electricity nearly 2,000 years before modern science? Or are we projecting modern ideas onto a jar that was never meant to carry power? If the Baghdad Battery is real, if it was used to generate current, then history is broken. The timeline of invention bends. It tells us the ancients knew forces we thought belonged only to the modern age. And if they knew, what else did they hide? The Baghdad Battery is not just an artifact. It is a stage for competing ideas. On one side stand the visionaries, scientists, historians, and enthusiasts who see electricity sparking from its clay walls. On the other side are skeptics, archaeologists, conservators, and engineers who argue it is nothing more than a misinterpreted vessel. Let us walk through the possibilities. Theory 1. Electroplating. This is the most famous hypothesis. Imagine a Mesopotamian workshop 2,000 years ago. Silver jewelry placed into a copper solution. Current flows from the battery, depositing a thin sheen of gold or copper onto the surface. A poor man's treasure transformed into a rich man's prize. The elegance of the idea is undeniable, and experiments today show it works. Using replicas of the jar, researchers have successfully plated metal, but the evidence is thin. We find no traces of wires, no electrodes, no plating baths. If electroplating was common, where are the thousands of gilded objects made this way? Without them, this theory teeters. Theory 2. Religious spectacle. Picture this. A temple dark with incense. A priest holding a copper wand. He touches it to an iron idol, and the faint spark leaps. The crowd gasps. Was it the god himself? Or was it clever science disguised as divinity? Electricity, in that time, would have been indistinguishable from magic. This theory resonates because ancient rituals often blurred natural forces with the supernatural. Yet again, no clear proof survives. Theory 3. Medical use. Could the jar have been used for electrotherapy? We know that in later centuries, Greeks and Romans used electric fish torpedo rays to numb pain or treat headaches. Why not a clay battery producing small shocks? The voltage is tiny, but the sensation is real. A jolt across the skin, a tingle to the nerves. A healer might have interpreted it as a treatment blessed by the gods. But, once more, no writings or inscriptions suggest it. Theory 4. It was never a battery at all. This is the skeptic's refuge. The jar, they argue, was simply a storage vessel. The copper tube may have held scrolls or sacred texts. The iron rod could have been a stopper, not a conductor. The bitumen sealant? Nothing more than preservation. A mundane object dressed up by modern imagination. And the most compelling point the skeptics make is this. If ancient Mesopotamia had electricity, even in the most rudimentary form, why is there no broader infrastructure? No lamps, no motors, no systems. Why only this one enigmatic jar? The debate rages on. Each theory shines briefly, only to dim under scrutiny. And yet, The allure of the Baghdad Battery remains, because sometimes the power of an artifact is not in what it was, but in what it makes us imagine. This jar, simple and silent, invites us to dream of civilizations that flirted with forces we thought were modern. Perhaps it is misunderstood pottery. Perhaps it is forgotten science. Perhaps it is both. Either way, it has sparked something undeniable. Not electricity, but imagination. The Baghdad Battery has never truly slept. It has been woken again and again by the hands of modern experimenters. Scientists, hobbyists, even television crews have tried to breathe life back into this clay jar. Each replication tells us something. Each one adds fuel to the debate. Let's begin with the simplest. In the 1930s, Wilhelm Koenig, the archaeologist who first studied the jar, suggested it might be a battery. Soon after, engineers filled replicas with vinegar. The result? A faint, steady current. Barely enough to light a tiny bulb, but enough to prove the concept was possible. Later, in the 1970s, researchers at General Electric tried their hand. They crafted larger versions, linked them in series. The electricity became measurable, enough to plate small trinkets with a film of metal. The excitement grew. Documentaries, like those on Mythbusters, took the experiment further. The hosts poured grape juice into clay jars fitted with copper and iron. They wired several together. And the outcome? A series of sparks, weak but real. The jar, once an artifact, became a working power source on live television. But here lies the paradox. Yes, it works, but so do many things not used in history. If I roll copper and iron together and pour an acid, of course I get a battery. But did the ancients ever do this intentionally? Or are we moderns forcing a function onto a form? This is where replication both enlightens and deceives. It proves feasibility. It does not prove history. And yet replication does something powerful. It turns the abstract into the tangible. When you see sparks fly from a clay jar, you feel history differently. You imagine Mesopotamian hands holding the same possibility. That sensation alone keeps the battery alive in cultural memory. Beyond labs and TV studios, artists and technologists have built larger installations. Some museums run exhibits where visitors can pour vinegar into reconstructed jars and watch the voltmeter rise. Children stare wide-eyed, as if the past has whispered into the present. Even skeptics admit this. The replication experiments may not prove the jar's purpose, but they prove its potential. Potential is enough to inspire. Enough to unsettle. Enough to challenge what we think we know about the boundaries of ancient science. And so, the Baghdad Battery is no longer just a relic. It has become an icon, a symbol not of what it definitely was, but of what it possibly could have been. Replication cannot give us the final truth, but it reminds us that every artifact is alive, so long as we dare to test it. And the Baghdad Battery? It keeps humming faintly in labs and workshops across the world. Not because it must, but because we cannot stop asking, what if? Electricity feels modern. It powers our cities, our machines, our very lives. We think of it as a gift of the 18th and 19th centuries. Volta with his pile, Faraday with his coils, Edison with his bulbs. But the Baghdad Battery whispers a dangerous question. Were we really the first? Because if this jar is more than pottery, then electricity is not modern. It is ancient. That changes everything. It means our ancestors brushed against the same invisible force that drives today's world. Not with wires and grids, not with smartphones and satellites, but with clay, copper, and iron. The idea is unsettling. If they had electricity, even in crude form, how did they see it? To us, Voltage is physics. To them, it may have been magic, or medicine, or metallurgy. Knowledge is not always linear. Sometimes it sparks, burns bright, then vanishes into ash. Think of the Antikythera mechanism in Greece, a machine of gears that charted the heavens 1,000 years before clockwork was invented. Think of Roman concrete, stronger than many mixes we use today. Its formula lost for centuries. The Baghdad Battery may belong to this same family of forgotten knowledge, hints that our ancestors touched truths we rediscovered much later. But here is the mystery. Why didn't it spread? Why didn't electricity evolve from this humble jar into something greater? Perhaps it was too limited. 1 volt is not much, too weak to light a city, too fragile to become infrastructure. Or perhaps its purpose was secret, held by a select few, priests, alchemists, craftsmen who guarded knowledge as power. If so, then when those keepers of knowledge vanished, the science went with them, buried under centuries of sand and silence. And we, modern humanity, were forced to rediscover it from scratch. This is not the first time knowledge has died. Libraries burned, civilizations fell, scrolls turned to dust, but artifacts like the Baghdad Battery remain. Silent witnesses, clues without instructions. They remind us of a haunting possibility. That history is not a ladder, always climbing upward. It is a cycle. Knowledge rises, knowledge falls, and sometimes knowledge hides, waiting for us to stumble across it again. When we found the Baghdad Battery, we may not have uncovered an ancient power plant, but we may have uncovered proof that the pursuit of science is older than we dare admit. Older than our textbooks say. Older than our pride allows. Electricity, then, is not ours. It belongs to humanity across time. Perhaps it was discovered once. Perhaps it was lost. And perhaps we are not the only civilization that ever learned to make the invisible flow. The Baghdad Battery was more than clay and metal. To understand why, we need to dissect it, literally and scientifically. Picture the jar again. 6 inches tall, clay on the outside. Inside sat a copper cylinder, rolled like a sheet of thin metal into a tube. Suspended within was an iron rod, carefully placed in the center. The two metals never touched, thanks to asphalt or bitumen sealing the top. Now pause for a moment. If you've ever studied chemistry, you may already sense the design. This arrangement mirrors the fundamental structure of a galvanic cell, the basis of every battery. One metal acts as the anode, the other, the cathode. When an acidic liquid is introduced, like vinegar, lemon juice, or fermented wine, it becomes the electrolyte. This liquid allows ions to flow between the two metals, and that flow, it produces electricity, tiny but real. A current powerful enough to shock your tongue if you touched it. Not enough to power a light bulb. Not enough to run a machine. But enough to prove that ancient hands may have stumbled on, or perhaps intentionally engineered the very principle of electrochemistry. In modern experiments, researchers have replicated this setup. They've poured vinegar into replicas of the jar. The result? A steady trickle of voltage, around 0.5 to 1 volt per jar. One jar, weak. But connect several in series, and the voltage multiplies. 10 jars in a row could produce around 10 volts. 50 jars could surpass 50 volts. It doesn't sound like much in today's age of megawatts, but in antiquity, it could have been enough for subtle wonders. Imagine an ancient craftsman electroplating gold onto silver jewelry. Imagine a healer using the faint shocks as a strange therapy. Imagine a temple priest, cloaked in ritual, using sparks to dazzle believers. It would have seemed like divine power. Yet here lies the tension. Is this interpretation true science, or imaginative projection? Archaeologists are split. Some argue the design is far too coincidental to ignore. Others dismiss it as wishful thinking, seeing electricity where none existed. Because there is one missing piece: no traces of wiring, no evidence of multiple jars connected, no ancient texts describing their use as batteries. Without context, the jar is a riddle. It works in a lab. But did it ever work in ancient Mesopotamia? We cannot know for certain. What we do know is this: the Baghdad Battery, whether intentional or not, is a scientific mirror. It forces us to ask, were the ancients experimenting with forces of nature we thought belonged only to the modern world? And if they were, how much have we forgotten? It was 1938. In the suburbs of Baghdad, workers were digging. Among the dust and broken pottery, they found a strange clay jar, about 6 inches tall, narrow at the top. Inside was a copper cylinder. At its center, an iron rod. The pieces were sealed with asphalt, as if meant to stay together forever. To most archaeologists, it looked like junk, a jar, a container, nothing more. But Wilhelm König, director of the National Museum of Iraq, saw differently. He had studied modern electrical devices, and this ancient jar looked eerily familiar. The copper and iron arrangement mirrored a battery's core, an anode, a cathode, a sealed container. To König, this was not coincidence. It was design. And if he was right, the people of Mesopotamia, 2,000 years ago, had created a power source, a battery. A device centuries ahead of its time. Not every mystery is as mysterious as it seems. For all the sparks and speculation, some argue the Baghdad Battery is not a battery at all. That it is, quite simply, a jar. A jar with unusual fittings, yes, but still, just a jar. The skeptics raise strong points. First, context. The jar was found among other artifacts in the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia. But there were no wires, no electrodes, no other electrical devices nearby. If this was part of an electrical system, why only one? Where are its companions? A single light bulb without a socket is just glass. A single battery without a circuit is just metal. Second, function. The copper tube inside could easily have been for storage. Perhaps it held scrolls, prayers, or rolled parchment. The iron rod? Nothing more than a stopper. The bitumen sealant? A practical way to close the jar, keep moisture out, and preserve what was inside. The entire design makes sense without invoking electricity. Third, absence of records. Ancient Mesopotamia was a literate society. They inscribed tablets, carved stone, recorded rituals and trades. If they had harnessed electricity, even in a small way, why did they not write about it? Where are the diagrams, the instructions, the ceremonies? There are none. And that silence is deafening. Because when people discover something truly powerful, they don't hide it. They celebrate it. They immortalize it in story, in scripture, in record. But the Baghdad Battery has no story. Only our story projected onto it. Fourth, coincidence. Sometimes forms overlap. A wheel looks like the sun. A seashell looks like a spiral galaxy. But they are not the same. So too, the Baghdad Battery may resemble a galvanic cell by chance, not by design. It is our modern eyes that recognize the similarity. We know batteries. We live in an electric world. So we see electricity everywhere. But to the ancients, copper and iron together may have meant nothing more than durability or ritual symbolism, not science. And so, skeptics argue, The battery is an illusion, a 20th century idea imposed on a 2,000-year-old jar. In this view, the Baghdad Battery is not proof of forgotten genius. It is proof of how hungry we are to find ourselves in the past. Proof that sometimes the mystery is not in the object but in our interpretation of it. Could it all be a mistake? Could we be staring at misunderstood pottery, dressed up in the robes of science fiction? Perhaps, but even mistakes have power. Because even if the Baghdad Battery was never a battery at all, it has still electrified our imagination. And that is a kind of energy that cannot be dismissed. The Baghdad Battery is more than an artifact. It is a story. And stories, when they brush against mystery, take on a life of their own. Why do we love to imagine ancient high-tech? Why do we hunger for lost civilizations, forgotten sciences, secret machines buried in sand? The answer lies deep in the human heart. We long for wonder. We long for the impossible made possible. When we see a clay jar that might be a battery, our minds race. We picture golden cities, lit by hidden currents. We imagine priests wielding lightning in temples. We dream of knowledge too fragile to last, slipping through history's fingers. It is the same reason we are drawn to tales of Atlantis, to pyramids aligned with the stars, to the Antikythera mechanism, whispering of forgotten astronomy. These artifacts and myths spark something primal, the belief that the world once held secrets greater than we know today, and perhaps still does. The Baghdad Battery lives at this crossroads. Archaeology says one thing, our imagination says another, and in between is fascination. For filmmakers, the jar is perfect, a small, real object that hints at a larger, unseen story. For writers, it is a symbol, proof that science can hide in plain sight. For conspiracy theorists, it is fuel, evidence. So they claim that history has been edited, truths erased, technology hidden. For the curious, it is a puzzle, not solved, not forgotten, just waiting. But beyond the speculation, the deeper reason is this. When we project advanced technology into the past, we make the past feel closer to us. We see ourselves in the ancients. We imagine their curiosity mirroring ours, their mistakes, their triumphs, their questions. The Baghdad Battery lets us believe they were not so different, that they too were explorers of nature's mysteries. This fascination also reflects our anxiety. If knowledge can be lost once, could it be lost again? If civilizations can discover electricity, only to let it vanish, what does that mean for us? Will our own science, one day, be nothing more than broken glass and corroded metal, puzzling future archaeologists? The Baghdad Battery does not answer. It only raises questions, and that is why we return to it, again and again, because the jar is not just about the past. It is about us, our hunger for mystery, our fear of forgetting, our desire to believe that the world is stranger, older, and more wondrous than we can ever prove. That fascination keeps the Baghdad Battery alive, not as a power source, but as a story that will never run out of charge. It could track planetary motions, a computer, built 2,000 years before the word computer existed. Then there are the Nazca lines in Peru, giant figures etched into the desert, visible only from the sky. Animals, spirals, arrows stretching for miles. Why make something no one on the ground could see? Coincidence or an aerial map for gods? Travel to Egypt, and the mystery deepens. In the temples of Dendera, carved into stone, lie the Dendera light bulbs. Strange figures, shaped like glass tubes with snakes inside. Some say they represent myth. Others say they show electricity. lighting the halls of ancient stone. In India, ancient texts describe vimanas, flying machines of the gods, crafts powered by Mercury, weapons that sound eerily like missiles. Were they poetry or memory? The London hammer adds another riddle, a hammer encased in rock, dated to millions of years. A modern-looking tool, locked in prehistoric stone. Impossible, or proof that history hides secrets? And in Iraq itself, near the site of the Baghdad Battery, ancient carvings show winged beings with strange devices. Not divine, not human, something else. Each of these artifacts shares a theme. They do not fit neatly into our timeline. They feel like intruders, fragments of a story we only half remember. Archaeologists explain them with caution. Some are coincidences. Some are misunderstood symbols. Some are simply outliers. But for storytellers, for dreamers, they are sparks. They suggest that human history is not a straight line, that it twists, it bends. That knowledge may have risen and fallen over and over again. The Baghdad Battery becomes part of a chorus. The Antikythera mechanism, the Dendera carvings, the Nazca Desert, the London hammer. Together they whisper, "We were more than you think." And perhaps, hidden under desert sands or deep ocean floors, more secrets wait. Each discovery renews the fascination. Each out-of-place artifact becomes a reminder. We don't know everything. We never will. And that, perhaps, is the most electrifying power of all. Between 0.5 and 1 volt per jar. Line up several, and the voltage rises. In 1978, researchers from the General Electric High Voltage Laboratory in Massachusetts tested this. Their conclusion: the Baghdad Battery could indeed generate electricity. Not enough to power a lamp, not enough to shock, but enough for tiny tasks. Electroplating, perhaps, a tingle on the skin, or maybe something symbolic. In 2005, a Discovery Channel program built replicas. They powered them with fruit juice. The jars worked. They lit a small bulb, but only just. The glow was weak, flickering, unstable. Still, the sight was mesmerizing. A clay jar, holding a spark from 2 millennia ago. Other experiments pushed further. Could this device have been medicinal? Some suggested it was used for electrotherapy, a mild electric shock as treatment. But the currents were faint, hardly enough to heal or harm. Others wondered if it was ritualistic. A hidden current, unseen but felt, could appear magical. A priest touching a rod, a spark dancing, a sign from the gods. The experiments gave no single answer. They proved possibility, not certainty. The Baghdad Battery could produce electricity, but whether it did and why remains a mystery. And here lies the tension. Science shows us what is possible. History asks us what is probable. Between the two is the gap where mystery thrives. Modern replications keep the story alive, because every time a bulb flickers, every time a replica hums with faint current, we are reminded that a clay jar can carry a question across 2,000 years. And no matter how small the spark, it is enough to keep the imagination burning. Another argument: the voltage is too low. Yes, experiments show it can produce 0.5 to 1 volt. But that is fragile power. It fades quickly. It requires constant refilling with acidic liquid. Would ancient people really keep jars of vinegar just to produce a weak spark? Skeptics doubt it. They argue instead that the Baghdad Battery is an out-of-place interpretation, like seeing a modern tool in a cloud shape. The form tricks the mind. But the reality is simpler. Other experts stress the absence of texts. No ancient writings mention electricity. No records of electroplating exist from Mesopotamia. No priests described sparks or shocks in rituals. Without words, the jar remains silent. This silence is powerful. It suggests that the battery theory is built more on imagination than history. Some critics even accuse media programs of exaggeration. Television thrives on mystery. A clay jar is boring, but a clay jar that can hold lightning? That sells. And so the legend grows. Meanwhile, archaeologists quietly insist on practicality. The Baghdad Battery, they say, was just storage. Nothing more. No electricity. No sparks. Just clay, copper, and iron. Sealed for protection. Yet even skeptics admit something. The debate refuses to die. Why? Because mystery is magnetic. Because humans want to believe. Because a jar that could be ordinary is far more exciting when it might be extraordinary. The skeptics remind us to stay grounded, to question, to doubt. But in doing so, they keep the story alive too. For every argument against, the question only grows stronger. What if the skeptics are wrong? What if the spark was real? The Baghdad Battery is not alone in sparking debate. It belongs to a wider mystery. How advanced were ancient civilizations really? Did they stumble upon technologies we associate with modern science? Or are we guilty of overestimating them? Let's step back. Ancient Egypt. Builders there cut massive stone blocks with stunning precision. Obelisks weighing hundreds of tons were moved across desert sands. Pyramids rose skyward, without cranes or engines. Even today, engineers argue about the exact methods. Was it brute force? Ramps? Lubricated sleds? Or something more sophisticated? Then there is Greece. In the city of Antikythera, divers discovered a corroded lump of bronze. It turned out to be a complex machine, now called the Antikythera mechanism. Gears, dials, rotating hands, all designed to track celestial movements. Some call it the world's first computer, built over 2,000 years ago. Centuries before the technology reappeared in Europe. Meanwhile, in China, inventors mastered gunpowder. They engineered seismographs. They designed intricate clocks, all long before Europe caught up. These examples suggest a pattern. Ancient minds were not primitive. They were ingenious, resourceful, driven to solve problems. But did they know electricity? Did they really create batteries? Skeptics say no. Supporters say yes, pointing to artifacts like gold-plated jewelry in Mesopotamia. Could electroplating explain the shine? Or was it simply skilled hammering and polishing? The line is thin, hard to prove, harder still to dismiss. One thing is certain. Ancient people experimented. They mixed chemicals. They observed reactions. They learned from fire, from metal, from lightning itself. When storms lit the sky, they must have wondered. When amber rubbed against fur produced sparks, they must have noticed. Curiosity is timeless. It does not belong to one era. That is why the Baghdad Battery matters. Not only as a possible device, but as a symbol. A question mark carved in clay. How far did curiosity take them? What secrets are still buried? Every dig uncovers fragments, sometimes mundane, sometimes extraordinary. Every fragment tells us the ancients knew more than we think, but perhaps less than we imagine. The truth lies in between, not lost super science, not total ignorance, but practical brilliance. And yet, the gaps remain. Those gaps invite speculation. Speculation fuels legend. Legend feeds belief. Belief keeps debates alive. The Baghdad Battery, the pyramids, the Antikythera mechanism, each is a doorway into the unknown. And once opened, it is hard to close. How much did they really know? Enough to impress us, enough to confuse us, enough to make us wonder if the ancient world was more electric than we ever imagined. If the Baghdad Battery really worked, what could it have powered? This is where speculation begins, and where history turns into possibility. The most obvious use is electroplating, coating objects with a thin layer of precious metal. Imagine copper jewelry dipped in a gold solution. The battery provides a current. The gold attaches. A dull trinket becomes dazzling. Some archaeologists believe this explains gold-plated artifacts found in Mesopotamia, but others argue skilled artisans could achieve similar results with mechanical polishing. So the debate continues. Another possibility is medicine. Electricity and healing may seem like a modern idea, but ancient healers experimented with strange methods. The Greeks used electric fish to numb pain. Romans described shocks from torpedo rays. Could Mesopotamian healers have used tiny currents from the battery? Perhaps for pain relief. Perhaps to stimulate muscles? It's not impossible. Then there is ritual. Electricity is mysterious. Even today, it feels magical. A spark in the dark. A tingling sensation on the skin. Imagine a priest using the Baghdad Battery during a ceremony. Touching it to metal, a spark leaps out. The crowd gasps. The priest smiles. A god's power revealed, hidden in clay. For religion, even a small trick can have massive impact. Could that have been its true role? Some propose it was used for science itself. Experiments. Curiosity. Children today play with batteries and wires, just to see what happens. Why not the ancients? A scholar, bored with clay tablets, might tinker with metals. Mix solutions, discover reactions. The jar becomes a classroom, not a power plant. But here's the catch. The Baghdad Battery produces very little energy. Maybe half a volt. Barely enough to tingle. Not enough to run a light bulb. Not enough to power machines. So, forget images of glowing lamps in ancient temples. That belongs more to fantasy than reality. Still, even a small spark can inspire. Imagine you lived 2,000 years ago. The world around you is lit only by fire, candles, torches, the sun itself, and then in your hands, a jar produces a spark that does not belong to fire. A spark born from clay, copper, and liquid. Wouldn't you think it was magic? Wouldn't you think it was divine? Maybe that was the true power of the Baghdad Battery. Not energy, but awe. Not technology, but wonder. And wonder is powerful. It fuels curiosity. It drives invention. It connects people to mystery. The Baghdad Battery might not have lit temples, but it might have lit minds. And once a mind is sparked, history changes. Even if the battery was just an experiment, its story keeps reminding us. Electricity is not just science. It is also imagination. And imagination may have been the battery's most important output of all. Not everyone is convinced by the Baghdad Battery story. In fact, many archaeologists reject it outright. They argue the jar is not a battery at all, just pottery. Plain and simple. Let's examine their case. First, the construction. The jar is crude. The copper tube is rolled metal, not finely engineered. The iron rod is rough. The asphalt seal is messy. Nothing about it screams precision device. Skeptics say it looks more like storage, perhaps for scrolls, or documents, or sacred texts wrapped in copper to protect them. The asphalt might have simply sealed the contents from decay. Second, the lack of context. If the Baghdad Battery was truly a device, why only one? Why not dozens? Why not an entire workshop filled with them? We have one, maybe two. That's it. Skeptics point to this silence. One artifact does not equal a revolution. Third, the missing wires. A battery without a circuit is useless. No wires have been found. No terminals. No tools to connect them. Without those, it's just a jar with metal inside. Fourth, the electrolyte problem. Yes, acids like vinegar or lemon juice could power it, but no traces of such liquids have been found in the jars, and organic materials rarely survive 2,000 years. Still, the absence weakens the claim. Fifth, the practical use. A half-volt battery is weak. Skeptics argue, why would Mesopotamians invent something so limited? What would they have done with it? It could not light a lamp. It could not drive machinery. Even electroplating is doubtful without strong, consistent currents. So why build it? Better to see it as ritual or symbolic. Maybe the copper and iron had religious meaning. Maybe the sealed jar was part of burial practices. Maybe the function was entirely spiritual, not electrical. Finally, there is the danger of projection. Modern minds see technology everywhere. We want the past to mirror the present. We look at a clay jar and imagine circuits, but perhaps the ancients had no such intentions. Perhaps we are the ones making it into a battery. The skeptics urge caution. Evidence should lead theory, not the other way around. And yet, even among skeptics, there is curiosity. Because the jar is odd, unusual. It does not fit neatly into categories. That is why it resists dismissal, and why it resists belief. It sits in a gray zone, between artifact and device, between ritual and science, between pottery and power source. The skeptics may be right. It may be nothing more than a storage container. But the mystery persists. Because mystery, unlike pottery, never crumbles with time. And so, the Baghdad Battery remains a puzzle skeptics cannot fully solve, and believers cannot fully prove. That tension is what keeps the debate alive. To test the Baghdad Battery, modern scientists decided to build it. Not once, but many times. In labs and workshops around the world, they followed the ancient design. A clay jar, a copper cylinder, an iron rod, sealed with asphalt. Then, they added the missing ingredient, an electrolyte. Some used vinegar, others lemon juice. Some even tried grape juice, thinking of ancient wines. And the result? The jar produced voltage. Not much, but measurable. Half a volt, sometimes a little more. Enough to feel a tingle on the skin. Enough to power a tiny reaction. Not enough to light a bulb. Not enough to run machines. But real electricity. This discovery reignited debate. Could the ancients have done the same? Could they have filled their jars with acidic liquids? After all, vinegar was common. So was wine. So was fermented fruit. The chemistry was available. But did they know how to use it? That is the crucial question. One experiment replicated electroplating. Scientists dipped a dull object into a metal solution, hooked it up to the replica battery. Hours later, a thin gold layer appeared. Proof, at least in modern hands, that it could work. Another test involved pain relief. Researchers applied weak currents to skin and muscles. It caused tingling, some relief, but no lasting effect. Still, the principle was there. Electricity interacts with the body, and the ancients might have noticed. But not all experiments succeeded. Some reconstructions produced nothing at all. The copper corroded. The seal failed. The voltage dropped quickly. The jars proved fragile, inconsistent, unreliable. This led many scientists to doubt practical use. Yes, they can work, but no, they are not efficient. Imagine trying to electroplate with dozens of jars, replacing liquids constantly, monitoring fragile seals. It feels clumsy. It feels impractical. And yet, the fact remains. They can work, even if weakly, even if poorly. They work, and that keeps the mystery alive. Because if modern hands can coax power from clay, why not ancient ones? Maybe the ancients did not understand the science. Maybe they only saw sparks. Maybe they treated it as magic. Or maybe they experimented, just as we do today. Small scale, local curiosity, no grand revolution, just tinkering. But tinkering matters. It is how invention begins. Every modern technology began as a fragile prototype, a toy, a curiosity. The Baghdad Battery might have been exactly that, a curiosity, a fragile spark of discovery. One that never caught flame, but the fact that it could exist at all remains astonishing. When word of the Baghdad Battery spread, the world reacted quickly. Scientists were intrigued. Archaeologists were cautious. And the media? The media went wild. Headlines screamed, "The oldest battery in the world." Documentaries dramatized sparks leaping from jars. TV hosts spoke of glowing temples and lost electricity. The public was fascinated because the story touched something deep. A love of mystery, a suspicion that the past was smarter than we think. But among scholars, the reaction was mixed. Some dismissed it as pseudoscience. They warned against exaggeration. They insisted the jar was nothing more than storage. Others, however, allowed curiosity. They admitted the design does resemble a battery. They pointed to successful replications. They asked, if not a battery, then what? In academic journals, debates raged. One side demanded hard evidence. The other side embraced possibility. But as academics argued, the idea escaped their control. It entered popular culture. Books on ancient mysteries featured the Baghdad Battery alongside pyramids and Stonehenge. Conspiracy theorists latched on. They claimed it was proof of forgotten technology. Some said Mesopotamians had electricity before Edison. Others stretched further. They spoke of alien visitors, of knowledge given to humanity by beings from the stars. Fringe theories multiplied. The Baghdad Battery became a symbol, a gateway into alternative history, a spark for imagination, sometimes reckless, sometimes inspired. Meanwhile, museums faced a challenge: how to present the artifact responsibly. Too cautious, and the public lost interest. Too bold, and the story became sensationalized. Some museums displayed replicas, allowing visitors to see sparks themselves. Others stuck to conservative labels: clay jar with copper and iron components. The tension between caution and excitement never ended, and the internet only amplified it. YouTube videos showed ancient light bulbs powered by replicas. Websites speculated about secret Mesopotamian laboratories. Forums debated endlessly. Was it real science or fantasy? The battery became more than an object. It became a mirror, reflecting our hopes, our doubts, our hunger for mystery. For scholars, it was frustrating. For storytellers, it was gold. For the public, it was irresistible. Even today, the Baghdad Battery is more famous for what it might be than for what it is. Its fame is not rooted in certainty, but in possibility, and possibility travels faster than truth. Perhaps that is why the global reaction never settled. Because mystery is more powerful than answers. And the Baghdad Battery, whether pottery or power source, remains a global mystery that refuses to dim. The Baghdad Battery is not the only clue. Other cultures, too, hint at a knowledge of electricity. Fragments of evidence, scattered sparks across history. Let's begin with ancient Egypt. On the walls of the Dendera temple, carvings show strange shapes, long tubes, bulb-like, connected by lines. Some claim these are Dendera light bulbs. Proof that Egyptians knew electric lighting. Mainstream Egyptologists disagree. They say the carvings depict lotus flowers, symbols of creation, not circuits. Still, the images fuel speculation, because the shapes look uncanny. Then, Greece. The philosopher Thales of Miletus described static electricity. He noticed amber rubbed with fur, attracted dust and straw. This was over 2,500 years ago. The word electricity itself comes from electron, the Greek word for amber. They didn't build devices, but they observed the phenomenon. Clear signs of curiosity. In Rome, writers spoke of torpedo fish, creatures that shocked when touched. Pliny the Elder described their numbing effects. Doctors used them as therapy. A living swimming battery, harnessed for medicine. In China, records speak of lodestones, naturally magnetic rocks. They were used for divination, and later for compasses, a different force than electricity, but part of the same invisible realm. Invisible forces fascinated every culture. Lightning in the sky, static on the skin, the shocks of fish, the glow of fireflies. Nature was alive with energy. The question is, did anyone capture it? The Baghdad Battery suggests Mesopotamia may have tried. But what about others? Some fringe researchers believe so. They point to gold-plated artifacts across the world. Could electroplating explain them? Or was it just extraordinary craftsmanship? They point to legends of eternal lamps in temples, flames that never died. Could these be distorted memories of electric light? Mainstream scholars push back. They warn, stories are not science. Artifacts must be tested, not imagined. But the pattern is clear. Across civilizations, invisible energy fascinated people. They observed it. They described it. Sometimes they used it through animals, through magnets, through fire. The Baghdad Battery may not be alone. It may be one piece of a larger puzzle. A puzzle suggesting that the road to electricity did not begin with Benjamin Franklin or Edison, but with forgotten hands, thousands of years earlier. Even if they did not fully understand it, even if their devices were crude, they touched the spark. And once a spark is touched, it is never forgotten. That is the possibility that lingers, not just in Mesopotamia, but across the ancient world. The Baghdad Battery may simply be the loudest clue, but whispers exist everywhere, waiting to be heard. Waiting to remind us that electricity may be older than we dare to believe. ChatGPT said, "Imagine standing in a temple. The air is heavy with incense. Torches flicker against the stone walls, and at the center, a priest holds a small object. He touches it to your skin, and suddenly you feel a shock, a sting, a spark of power. In the ancient world, that would not be science. It would be magic. It would be divine. The Baghdad Battery, if real, would not have been a laboratory tool. It would have been a sacred tool. Its energy, mysterious and invisible, would appear supernatural. And in ancient societies, the line between science and religion did not exist. To the Mesopotamians, power came from the gods. If the jar could shock, or tingle, or spark, it was not electricity. It was a whisper of the divine. Archaeologists have suggested this, that the battery was used in ritual. Perhaps priests applied it to idols, making them hum, or to worshippers, making them feel the god's presence. A jolt mistaken for a blessing, a sensation mistaken for a miracle. It is not without precedent. The Greeks used torpedo fish in temples to numb pain, to display power. Even in Rome, the electric eel was known. Its sting was feared, yet revered. Now imagine an artificial jar that mimics this. Contained power. Portable shock. It would awe people who had no concept of electricity. The priest would seem godlike. The ritual, unforgettable. Some fringe theories go further. They suggest batteries powered sacred lamps, that statues lit from within, that temples glowed without flame. To believers, this would be the god's light. To skeptics, trickery, but both would bow before it. This raises a larger question. Was the Baghdad Battery technology, or was it theater? Religion has always used spectacle. Thunderous drums, blinding fire, echoing chants, shock and awe. Tools of faith. Electricity, in any form, would be the ultimate spectacle, because it is unseen, because it comes from nowhere, because it feels alive. A spark is more than sensation. It is a story, a sign, a mystery that demands meaning. For ancient minds, that meaning was divine. So perhaps the Baghdad Battery was not about science at all. Perhaps it was about belief, not discovery, but devotion. Not experiment, but experience. A tool of priests, not scholars. And yet, in serving faith, it may have accidentally birthed science, because the spark that awed worshippers is the same spark that powers our modern world. From temples to laboratories, the current never changed. Only its story did. And that story reminds us, every miracle is just science, waiting for a name. You said, the Baghdad Battery may be mysterious, but mysteries invite curiosity. And curiosity demands experiments. So modern scientists have rebuilt it. Clay jars, copper cylinders, iron rods, as close to the original as possible. The question was simple. Would it work? The answer, yes. When filled with vinegar, or grape juice, or lemon juice, the replica produced a voltage. Not much. A round volt. A tiny spark. Enough to tingle the skin. Enough to prove Koenig's theory was possible. But possible does not mean practical. So researchers pushed further. Could it power anything? Electroplating became the next test. Take a silver object, dip it in solution, pass a current through it, and gold can coat its surface. Some replicas showed this worked. Thin layers, delicate coatings, but evidence from Mesopotamia still missing. No tools, no half-plated treasures, no workshops filled with jars, which raised new questions. Were the replicas a modern fantasy, a projection of our own world onto the ancient one? Or were we simply missing the evidence? Experimental archaeologists leaned into the idea. They used dozens of replica jars. Wired together, the voltage rose. 10 volts, 20 volts. Enough to power small devices. still primitive, but undeniably electric. Then came demonstrations, television shows, documentaries, museums, scientists holding replica jars, lighting tiny bulbs, sending sparks across wires. The crowds were amazed, but skeptics frowned, because those setups used modern wires, modern bulbs, modern knowledge. The ancients had none of these. So what did they really do? Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Some engineers argued the design was too crude. The iron would corrode. The copper would degrade. The voltage would fade. At best, it was unreliable. At worst, it was useless. Others countered. That's what makes it more impressive. If they discovered even a hint of electricity, with no context, no physics, no chemistry, it was a leap into the unknown, a spark in the dark. Whether used for science, ritual, or play, it was real. And the replicas prove it. The jar can make electricity. That fact is undeniable. But the purpose? Still hidden. Replicas do not just answer questions. They create more. Because holding one in your hand, feeling the tingle, watching the spark, you cannot help but wonder. If we found one jar, how many more were lost? If one spark survived, how many others burned unseen? The replicas remind us, the Baghdad Battery is not just history. It is a conversation between past and present, between what we know and what we may never know. A replica can light a bulb, but only imagination can light the past. ChatGPT said, here's Chapter 19, Skeptics and the Case Against the Battery. On 550 words, written from scratch in the same style. Chapter 19, Skeptics and the Case Against the Battery. Not everyone is convinced. In fact, many historians are not convinced at all. To them, the Baghdad Battery is not proof of ancient electricity. It is proof of our own imagination. Let's start with the object itself. The jar, the copper, the iron. Simple, common materials in ancient Mesopotamia. Nothing extraordinary. Now look at the context. The jar was found near Seleucia, in the ruins of a village. It was not connected to wires, not found in a laboratory, not sitting beside other scientific instruments. It was alone, and that is suspicious. If the ancients had discovered electricity, would we not see more? More jars, workshops filled with them, evidence of experiments, or objects plated with gold and silver. Yet none exist. No ancient texts describe electricity. No murals show sparks or wires. No libraries of clay tablets speak of energy. The silence is deafening. Skeptics point to corrosion. The iron rod rusts. The copper cylinder dissolves. The jar leaks. Over time, the reaction stops. Unreliable. Messy. Not practical for daily use. If this was a battery, it was a terrible one. And why would ancient craftsmen waste effort building a terrible tool? The skeptics have another idea. The jar was not a battery. It was a container for scrolls, for sacred texts, for small scrolls of papyrus or parchment. The copper could have protected the contents. The iron sealed the top. In this theory, the Baghdad Battery was just storage, nothing more. Other theories add weight. Some suggest it was for medicine, perhaps for storing herbs, or creating reactions between liquids. Some say it was for ritual, a symbolic container, offering meaning in religious ceremonies. No electricity required. And there is one more problem. If it was a battery, why only one? Science thrives on repetition. Engineers build many devices. Yet in the ruins of Mesopotamia, we find only this single jar. Skeptics argue, one jar does not make a science. It makes an oddity, an accident, a curiosity, but not electricity. And there is another layer. The battery theory became popular in the 1930s and 40s, at a time when electricity was exciting. It was the golden age of technology. People wanted to see themselves in the past, wanted to imagine ancient scientists as pioneers of modern tools. Projection, not history. So maybe the Baghdad Battery is misunderstood pottery, a storage jar, a relic, not a power source. And yet, the skeptics admit one thing. The jar can produce electricity, even if by accident, even if unintended, even if useless. The possibility remains. But possibility is not proof. And for skeptics, proof is everything. Without it, the Baghdad Battery is not a lost technology. It is just clay, copper, and iron. A story we told ourselves, because we wanted the past to look a little more like us. Perfect. Imagine standing in a dark temple, the air heavy with incense. Chants echo off stone walls. The priest raises his hand. He touches a hidden wire, and suddenly, a spark, blue light, crackles. The crowd gasps. The gods, it seems, have spoken. This is one of the most fascinating theories of the Baghdad Battery. Not science, not technology, but ritual. Magic disguised as electricity. Think of the ancient world. Mystery ruled. Priests held power not through knowledge, but through spectacle. They controlled light, fire, smoke, sound. They turned natural forces into divine messages. So why not electricity? A small jolt could shock a believer. A spark could light sacred powder. A faint glow could seem like the breath of a god. The battery may never have powered tools, but it may have powered belief. Imagine a golden statue in the temple. The priest invites worshippers to touch it. The hidden battery delivers a mild sting. The statue feels alive. The god feels real. Fear and wonder grip the people. Science serving religion. Or perhaps it was simpler. The battery could light a tiny flame. Phosphorescent powder, suddenly ignited in darkness. To the worshippers, a miracle. To the priest, a trick. Skeptics dismiss this idea. They say it is too convenient, too theatrical. But history is full of theater. Look to ancient Egypt. Priests controlled hidden mechanisms in temples. Doors that opened without touch. Statues that moved with gears. It was not divine power. It was clever engineering. Why not in Mesopotamia? Why not electricity? Some researchers propose another ritual use. Medicine. Electrotherapy. A small current applied to the skin. A tingle. A treatment. To the ancients, this could feel mystical. Healing through unseen forces, whether ritual or medicine. The principle is the same. Electricity was not for work. It was for wonder. It was for control. And that control was powerful. The Baghdad Battery, then, may not have been a tool of science. It may have been a weapon of belief. A sacred spark, used to keep people in awe. And here lies the beauty of the theory. It bridges two worlds, the scientific and the spiritual. The copper, iron, and acid provide the mechanism, but the ritual provides the meaning. Together, they create power, not enough to light a city, but enough to light the imagination, enough to light fear, enough to light faith. If true, The Baghdad Battery is not misunderstood pottery. It is proof of humanity's oldest instinct to turn mystery into magic, and to use that magic to hold power. In this vision, the spark was never about electricity. It was about control, and that is a power every civilization has sought to master. Yes, and wind up. ChatGPT said, theories are one thing, but science demands proof. So researchers rolled up their sleeves. They built it again. Clay jars, copper sheets, iron rods, acidic liquids, just like the ancient design. And yes, it worked. The jar produced a tiny current, half a volt, sometimes one, enough to feel. Not enough to power a lamp, not enough to run a motor, but enough to shock a finger, enough to plate a coin with silver, enough to ignite curiosity. In the 1930s, Wilhelm Koenig, the man who first proposed the battery theory, demonstrated his replica. Later, researchers from Germany to the US tried the same. Each time, the jar gave electricity, small, unstable, but real. Some scientists placed several jars together. A crude battery pack. The current grew stronger, still weak by modern standards, but strong enough to light a faint bulb, strong enough to suggest possibility. This is where the mystery deepens. If we can make it work, could they? If a modern scientist can plate gold, could a Mesopotamian artisan have done the same? If we can shock our skin with a jolt, could a priest have used it for ritual? The replicas prove the idea is possible, but possibility is not certainty. We still lack context. We still lack evidence of wires, of tools, of instructions. The battery stands alone, and yet, when scientists hold that replica, feel the spark, watch the coin plate with silver, the question whispers louder. Did they know? Did the ancients touch electricity, even for a moment? Perhaps by accident, perhaps on purpose, but they touched it, and that is enough to unsettle history. The Baghdad Battery remains unsolved, but in every replica, we feel the shadow of what could have been. A world where sparks danced in temples, where priests held lightning in jars, where the march of electricity began, not in the 1800s, but 2,000 years earlier. Outro. Sparks in the clay. The Baghdad Battery is small. A single jar. Clay, copper, iron. Yet it carries a weight far beyond its size, because it forces us to ask, how much did the ancients know? Were they scientists before their time, or are we simply dreaming the past into our own image? The jar may be misunderstood pottery, or it may be proof of forgotten genius. Either way, it is a reminder. History is never finished. Every artifact hides a question. Every ruin holds a possibility. The Baghdad Battery sparks not just electricity, but imagination. And perhaps that is its greatest power. Because in the end, discovery is not only about answers, it is about wonder. The wonder of clay, the wonder of sparks, the wonder of what might have been.